This is part 3 of my video series analysing Kathleen Stock's interview on LBC. Please enjoy. So we're going to start again where we left off. Iain Dame is questioning Kathleen Stock about the situation where men can acquire illegal sex under the Gender Recognition Act.
Circumstances, we will grant this, but it had conditions attached, like you had to live as a woman for 2 years, and you had to have...
What does it mean, live as a woman for 2 years? I mean, what in actual fact happens in terms of the panel that adjudicates these gender recognition certificates? They look for things like, are you utility bills in a feminine name? Can you refer to contacts that have conversations with you where they imply that they believe you are female? Are you signed up at your doctor's surgery using a feminine name? There's only one way to live as a woman, and that's to be born female and live to adulthood and then do whatever activities and interests are relevant to you. There is no other way of doing it.
The diagnosis of gender dysphoria, this sort of treated as a condition. So those are the things that modern trans activism wants to get rid of. They just want to say, no, you just fill in a form. You don't have to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. You certainly don't have to have had any operations or take any hormones. You can just, if you feel like you're a woman, you're a woman.
And some countries have gone down that road, haven't they?
Yes.
And the US, I think, being one of the latest.
I think in the US it varies from state to state, actually. So I think some states are much more permissive than others.
But I think in the US you can now, you don't have to identify as male or female. You can put an X on your passport.
In some states, I believe that's true. Yes.
And I think the British government was going down that road, but they pulled back from it.
Yes. So
thank goodness.
In 2018, they were doing a consultation at the time, which strongly suggested that they thought it was a good idea to go to self-ID, because it was being presented to them by organisations like Stonewall as kind of like, there's absolutely no cost to this, it's win-win, you're just letting people free to be themselves. But the trouble is, we don't live in a world in which people being free to be themselves doesn't have costs on other people. Sometimes you need to think about the interaction with wider society, and the problem is that, there are all sorts of reasons to keep women-only spaces for women if we can.
Just on that, how many cases have there been where, I guess we're talking about changing rooms, we're talking about prisons, maybe other areas as well. Mm-hmm. But for the number of cases that have been identified where a man, somebody who had been a man who now identifies as a woman, has sexually attacked a woman in one of those spaces.
Okay, first of all, the harm that is done to women from having a male person in a prison is incalculable. Women in prisons have a huge rate of head trauma from men's violence against women and children. I think it's something like 71% of women who are in prison have a head trauma as a result of men's violence. I'll have to look that up and check it. But certainly, the predominant history of women that end up in prison involves a history of abuse, perhaps as children. It involves domestic violence as adults, often very, very traumatic histories in relation to men. And one of the things that prison provides for these women, possibly for the first time in their lives, is the absence of abusive men. And in my ideal world, we wouldn't have male guards in prisons for women either, because I think they also can be a problem. But can you imagine going into prison? Perhaps you haven't paid your TV licence, or I don't know, whatever. And you get put in a prison cell with a 6'2" person who, to all intents and purposes to you, appears male. They enjoy their penis and frequently get it out. Perhaps they masturbate in front of you. Perhaps they make suggestive comments to you. How are you proposing to get any sleep? I mean, you would want to sleep with one eye open like a dolphin, because you would never want to take that one eye off this predator. And even if that predator makes no actual assault against you, the harm that you are enduring during that exposure to that male, and bearing in mind the statistics show us that, first of all, when male people transition, they continue with a male pattern of criminality, including a male pattern of criminality in terms of violent crime. And what we find in the prison population specifically, thanks to the fantastic work of Fair Play for Women, and do support them if you can, is that the people that are expressing a transgender identity, the male people in prison expressing a transgender identity as trans women, who are often being moved to women's prisons, they are far more likely to have been convicted of at least one sexual crime than the standard male prison population. So there's two possible explanations for that. Number one, it's possible that men that express a transgender identity are more likely to commit sexual assaults against women, or more likely to be caught from committing sexual assaults against women. Or number two, there is a population of male people, men, who are committing sexual assaults against women, who are expressing a trans identity for some secondary gain. So how do we work out which of those two situations it is, and which of those two situations is acceptable? Because in my book, neither of them are. No men in women's prisons, please.
A pretty small number, isn't it?
And it annoys me to ask people to quantify. I mean, for a start off, sexual assaults are endemic in society. There's so many of them that are never reported because women and girls know how dire the police response is when you report a sexual assault or a rape. I mean, the number of actual convictions is a tiny proportion of the total number of reported rapes. So the numbers that we have on record really don't give a true picture at all, and that's not what our argument rests on.
As far as I know, that it's a small number. I mean, there's been cases. There's one in particular in Dundee that I can think of. Katie Dolitovsky attacked a child in a Tesco's toilet or Sainsbury's toilet. There's been the one in prison involving Karen White, who didn't have a gender recognition certificate, but was had a conviction for a sex attack and was in a women's prison. But I mean, partly this is, I think, so there's different things to be said about these different contexts, but take the average changing room one. Changing rooms, it's not so much, I mean, it is a worry about those women. I think those women, you know, why should we discount their experience? It certainly shouldn't be sort of weighed up against some other kind of feeling.
No, but they've all, since time immemorial, there have always been perverts in changing rooms.
Yeah, but we don't want to make it worse. And basically we're allowing opportunistic males to self-identify into spaces, and they will. So nobody has, I've made this point a few times, but nobody has thought up until now, as far as I know, that excluding you from a women's changing room is an insult to you, or it suggests that you might be a sex attacker. The idea is you exclude males as far as possible generally in order to protect women from the few predators that there will be. I mean, that's human nature.
I suppose the point is, isn't it a sort of sledgehammer to crack a nut, given that these incidents are very, very rare?
Well, from a woman's perspective, that's a really quite breathtakingly casual thing to say, and it does betray a certain angle that is often taken by male commentators, if you don't mind me saying so, because from a woman's perspective, when we go into the changing rooms, we don't know. Well, you know, so we're being asked to assume that that a man or a male can identify their way into the changing room, and we just have to assume that most of the time they won't hurt us. A lot of women have in their past sexual assault experiences. A lot of women just want privacy. You know, there's no reason why we can't ask for those things. Women are allowed to have their own
entitled.
things.
We have that legal right.
I mean, of course, we can also provide third spaces. Why don't we have that conversation instead of assuming that women are there to sort out this?
You know what? Of all the groups that we want to be campaigning for third spaces for, I would just like to draw your attention to the Changing Places campaign, which is a campaign for people who are disabled, who require like an adult-sized changing station, who are frequently having to be changed on the floors of toilet cubicles, or you know, the vestibule of restrooms, and it, you know, it's completely unacceptable in this day and age. There should be far more Changing Places toilets than there are. I mean, people look them up on the map and this is where it determines where you go for a day out. But the population of people in the country that requires Changing Places toilets is far greater than the estimates of the number of people that are transgender. So I would really like to see, rather than we build a gender neutral cubicle in addition to our male and female and disabled provision, we actually use that space and extend the disabled toilet into a sizable room sufficient to create a Changing Places toilet. That would be my preference.
Problem. And the argument, of course, is supposed to be that trans women are being protected from male violence in male changing rooms by coming into the women's. So it's women being asked to sort out a problem caused by males. Why can't we resource third changing rooms?
Or indeed put men in with other men.
That's an interesting point. So you think, well, trans women should have their own
Well, why
changing
not?
rooms?
I mean, we've got to accommodate this problem. We've been told it's a suppressing.
You see, this is like an incremental goal where we kind of edge trans women out of women's toilets and into the third option, and then, you know, that we'll be happy with that. You know, I personally, as a disabled person, I'm not happy with creating more provision for people that do not require a separate provision. I mean, if you have acquired a disability because of your transition, whether that's mental or physical, you are entitled to use the disabled toilets. And I would suggest that a lot of people who are transitioned, I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, there are a lot of problems with having to be catheterised, there are a lot of problems with incontinence and UTIs, and goodness knows what. All of those people are entitled to use the disabled provision.
Social problem. Well, women think it's a pressing social problem for them too, so let's try and be creative about our solutions.
Kate in West Sussex has sent in a text saying, it sounds to me like this lady has an issue with men pretending to be women and not trans women. If a bloke wants to attack a woman, he'll do so. He doesn't need to pretend to be a woman to do so.
And yet so many men train for many years to become a surgeon, train for many years and become a priest, go on endless scouting holidays. I mean, the things that a male sex drive will drive men to do in pursuit of their sexual objects is endless, and it is no exaggeration to say that of course men would put on a dress and go to a changing room. I mean, that has happened plenty of times, but often when you present evidence of criminality from people with a trans identity, people that are trans rights activists will say to you, oh, well, that's not representative of the whole population. No, it's not, in the same way that if you were to present me with an example of a woman, my age, my race, who has committed a crime, you know, that's not to say that I am going to commit a crime. But what we are saying is that safeguarding involves protecting the mass of people from the worst that could happen. So that means all males should be excluded.
It's a very strange thing. I mean, safeguarding proceeds from thinking about the worst situation, not the best. And it's like saying if somebody wants to abuse children, they will. So we shouldn't have safeguarding in there. Women could do with more safeguarding than they already have. But the very least that they can expect is that when they get undressed or when they sleep, you know, that they can, if they've gone into a sort of public space to do so, then they should be, as far as possible, protected. So we're not saying that no women will be attacked in these spaces. We're saying that we're trying to minimise that. And one way to make things a lot worse would be to say that any opportunistic male that wants to can just come in.
This is the end of part 3. Watch out for part 4 dropping soon.